Allahu Akbar, Allah.
In the Quran, there's a chapter. It's a very short chapter, Al-Ikhlas. It's explaining the unity of God. Say He is God, the One. He is absolute. Everyone needs Him. He needs no one. He needs nothing. And He begets not has been begotten, and there is none equal to Him. This is a very simple explanation. So God is unique in all meanings.
Islam is an ancient religion dating back to the 7th century CE and is the world's second largest religion with over 1.8 billion followers known as Muslims. Its fundamental teachings are that there is only one God, Allah, and that Muhammad is the messenger of God. Muslims believe that Islam is the complete and universal version of primordial faith that was revealed many times before through prophets including Adam, Abraham, Moses and Jesus. We spoke to Sibin Saga about their understanding of the principal values of Islam.
The first one is Tawheed, means worshipping the God, and is the only one God. The second one is praying, which as a Muslim person, you need to pray 5 times a day, which is involve repeating some mantra and also doing some poses. The third one is fasting or roza, which is 1 month, and one Muslim need to fast means from the sunlight, the sunrise till the sunset, you're fasting completely, not even drinking water. And the fourth one is the zakat or the charity, which 1/5 of your income it needs to go back to the community to look after the needs of the community for who they cannot afford their living. And the last one is Hajj, which as a Muslim it's your duty to visit Mecca, the house of the God is represented as the house of the God, to go there and do the ceremony, which also highlighted or you connect with the place that it presented of the God for the Muslim.
Monotheism is very important something. It is the base for many values, and most important, it is the base of free thinking. When you are worshipping one God, you claim that only God judges me, then you are totally free, spiritually, bodily and mentally.
I think the principle of Islam as believing and worshipping the God as a concept of being give so much dedication and grounding and focus to human being. 5 times a day you dedicate your time to connect with that source of energy, to remember, to ask for guidance, to ask for forgiveness, to ask, and that's like your connection with that super energy.
With the emphasis of Islam on one God and the immaterial, it may be difficult to comprehend when and where beauty and art come into the religion. However, throughout the centuries, art has been used to unify human and the divine. Philosophers have argued that through the pursuit of beauty, we understand our own nature as human beings, as beautiful art seems to raise us to a higher moral and spiritual level. Therefore, a more apt question is how can we then define something as Islamic art? To answer this question, we decided to get in contact with the V&A, as they have a renowned gallery which holds a vast collection of Islamic objects from the Middle East and North Africa. We met up with Fuchsia, an expert in Islamic art who is currently working at the V&A as a research assistant for Iran. A man named Hettinger published a book in 2008 in which he argued that Islam, in the Western view of it, does not exist. This idea is linked to the term of Orientalism, which is strongly rooted in the history of European thought as an attempt to construct an image of the major other. Islamic art is just as complex as the term Islamic itself, and this makes it hard to integrate into the wider field. Many of the views and opinions expressed whilst classifying the arts of the Islamic world were developed as a Western observer sought to understand the art and don't derive from a Muslim's experience or perspective. Fusha then helped us understand some of the many misconceptions surrounding Islamic art, such as the place for genius, the sacred nature of geometry, and of course, Islam's stance on idolatry.
There is this thought of, even in Western sort of pre-Renaissance art, that there's very little kind of individual input, there's no genius, but there is in both Western art and in Islamic art. And while maybe in Islamic art and even literature, for example, in Persian poetry, it's a good thing to imitate other people. That's seen as sort of a craft, to be able to, for example, respond to someone else's poem with a very similar poem with like slight twists. That's kind of seen as like that's kind of seen as the sort of the most erudite thing to do. So it was sort of in the 70s and 80s there was this theory that the geometry is sort of inherently sacred. Like the geometry is symbolic of the order of the heavens and the earth, and and then it sort of reflects divine perfection. There is not really any evidence for that. There's an awareness of it, but there's never sort of a direct link. In some ways you could talk about this as being an Islamic object because you see it's got these hanging lantern motifs. There's one at either end, and that is sort of like a mosque lamp basically, and again this is one of those things that's sort of no necessarily like hard proof for it, but the lamp is used a lot in Islamic art, and because there's a famous, well not famous, but one of the sort of most popular verses in the Quran is called the chapter of the light, and it's talking about God as the light of the heavens and the earth, and it says like God's light is like a flame inside a lamp, inside a niche, and it is really, really beautiful. Yeah, I think that's obviously another of the big sort of controversial topics within Islamic art is
it's being interpreted in different ways.
Exactly, and is it legal, or is it allowed to depict human beings, or it starts at the top, can one depict God or the Prophet or people or even animals or whatever?
Because this is my understanding, the whole idea was not let make the concept of the God as an object to worship it, and the view of Muhammad against the Hindu was the worshipping one object, like worshipping God in the form of the sculpture. It makes the God smaller than its existence. So the God is not a concept in a physical being, but it's a concept in the mind, which is infinite. So everybody has their own perception of how this God it is, which is infinite. But he refused also have a portrait of himself. This is in any Muslim house, you'll never see the portrait of Muhammad or a God.
And I think the most important thing to say about that is that there's no hard and fast rule. There is no law per se about it. There are certain Quranic phrases and certain hadith sayings of the Prophet which suggest that one can extrapolate from that it's not okay. But there's no, straightforward prohibition. It's got birds all over it. So if you see in the top frieze there are 4 birds, and then behind the calligraphy, behind the script, there are other little birds. And so this is from a similar shrine to the ones I just talked about. It's from a shrine to sort of a Sufi mystical shape for a place called Natanz in Iran. And what's really interesting about this tile is that it shows us something about the relationship with depicting living beings, which we were just talking about. So it shows us that at the time when this tile was produced for the shrine, whoever made the tiles and whoever commissioned the shrine didn't feel uncomfortable about depicting birds in the shrine. However, you'll see that all the birds have had their heads chipped off. So at some later stage, someone else came along with a very different idea about what's okay to depict in a shrine and chipped all the birds' heads off. And I think what's really interesting, so first of all it shows us that there are varying views about depicting living beings, but it also shows us about sort of the power that images have. Like whoever chipped those heads off believed that those birds have some kind of physical power, and that literally by killing them, they can, rid them of their. And because there's another really common practice, which is in manuscript illustrations, like we were saying, you have miniature painting. At later stages, people come and draw lines across people's necks to literally sort of kill them. So I think it sort of shows a lot about the view of the power of the image, and the debate around sort of whether depicting somebody or something actually sort of gives it life.
The first mosque we decided to visit was the Shah Jahan Mosque in Woking, which happens to be the first purpose-built mosque in Europe outside Spain. The mosque was actually built by an Orientalist named Dr. Gottlieb Wilhelm Leitner. His intention was to establish an Oriental institute in Britain to enable visiting dignitaries from India to stay and study in culturally sympathetic surroundings. Therefore, with the help of donations from the Begum Shah Jahan, Dr. Leitner built England's first mosque in 1889. So we met up with Sami and Zainab, a couple who were both experts in Islamic art and architecture, and Sami gave us a tour of the mosque.
This is the main niche. This is where the Imam stands under, and he stands there, and everybody lines up in rows. The idea of lining up is equality. So I'm at the same as anybody next to me. Nobody is a step ahead, nobody's a step behind. And the early time when the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, came, the problem that people had with this new faith was that it was changing the social structure.
The Badshah Mosque in Lahore, if you Google it, you'll see a very similar kind of geometry with a central archway, an entrance portico, with side flanking, arches and niches and coming up. So I think it would be inspired from that building, but it wasn't copied. This is the interesting point. If you also go around the side of the building, which you can see, you'll see these very elongated windows with what's called an ogee arch. So it's a mixture of these two styles, and the proportion of them, they're very long and elongated. They look rather like a Gothic, exactly. Mosques try to use natural materials rather than going over with things. Nowadays, the contemporary mosques, concrete buildings, so on. But the early mosques were always building on traditions of that region. So in Turkey, we were mentioning, they're built on the Roman tradition of building, right? Where in Southeast Asia, if you look in places like Malaya, or Malaysia today, the early mosques were made of wood and, raised platforms, always following the native tradition of those people, which is interesting because it also allows the mosque to fit into that society.
So this idea that Islamic art has a deeply changeable form that varies across cultures makes it incredibly hard to define as a concept. Yet it also reflects the adaptability of the religion itself. Another interesting element Sami taught us about Islamic values in art is the notion of equality. In the early 20th century, the mosque was used as a centre to spread the word of Islam to the people of Britain, and this was done through the Muslim mission Woking, founded by a man named Khwaja. Visitors to the mosque were impressed by the equality within Islam and the brotherhood that seemed to exist between those of different backgrounds and social class, something that seemed to be lacking in Christian society. The success of this, however, was also due to the simplicity of the message Khwaja was preaching, a pure message based on faith and belief that encompassed the spirit of Islam, a message that was free of cultural and class barriers, yet not without order. This order was demonstrated to us by Sami through the use of geometry.
You can do anything you want, meaning you can create the art, but you must follow the geometric grid. As long as you're following the order, you are free. As in, but if there's no order, then it becomes chaos.
So in our first visit to the first British mosque, we learnt about the importance of equality within the religion of Islam and the way in which this value is expressed in the layout of prayer and architecture of the mosque. We were also reminded of the misconception of Islam as a dogged religion with no room for variation, as Sami made us aware of the diversity of architectural styles across different countries. Despite the vast contrast of representation, the religion itself still upholds a certain amount of order, which is to be followed in order to follow the faith. To conclude our research and understanding of Islamic art, we decided to visit Istanbul, an ancient city in Turkey that straddles Europe and Asia. It can be seen as a melting pot of numerous cultural and ethnic influences from the many empires that once ruled here. The influences on Istanbul's architecture include Byzantine, Genoese, Ottoman and Turkish. Early Byzantine architecture followed the classical Roman model of domes and arches, but improved these architectural concepts. This can be seen in the Hagia Sophia, which is considered the epitome of Byzantine architecture. A former Greek Orthodox and Christian patriarchal cathedral, later an Ottoman imperial mosque and now a museum, the Hagia Sophia was built at the beginning of the Middle Ages on the foundations of a pagan temple. It was at the time the world's largest building and seen as an engineering marvel, described as changing the history of architecture. The presence of 2 floors would be very unusual for a mosque, so this clearly dates back to when the Hagia Sophia was a cathedral. This is significant because it meant that people were organised according to class and gender when services were held at the cathedral, a notion that Sami told us Islam sought to renounce. During the 8th and 9th century, there was a period of iconoclasm in the Byzantine Empire, resulting in some of the mosaics being destroyed and the crosses being the only acceptable symbol. This was due to the fear that the viewer misdirected their veneration towards the image rather than the holy person. When the Hagia Sophia was converted into a mosque by the Ottomans in 1453, they added 4 minarets, as well as monograms of the 4 caliphs on the pillars flanking the apses and entrances of the nave. After the Ottoman conquest, the Byzantine mosaics were also hidden under yellow paint, except from the Theotokos in the apse, an image of the Virgin Mary with child. The capital columns in the Hagia Sophia are interesting as they are derivative of the classical Roman Ionic order capital and are also a Byzantine invention. The column capital has an important job in providing transition and support for the round column beneath. The decoration on the capital makes it appear lighter, insubstantial, which contradicts the stone with which it is made, a subversion from its task rather than the reflection of it. This carving technique is similar to the classical Greek Ionic. The style of the Hagia Sophia is a symbol of the Byzantine era, drawing its influence from the Greek Ionic, but also going on to influence Ottoman architecture, most notably in the development of the Sultan Ahmed Mosque. The Sultan Ahmed Mosque, also known as the Blue Mosque, is one of Istanbul's most famous buildings. It was commissioned by Sultan Ahmed in the 17th century and was designed to surpass all other mosques in the city. No idols or living creatures can be found in its art. Instead, the mosque's walls are alive with ornate patterns of flowers intertwined with calligraphy. The upper area is made up of 20,000 ceramic tiles, each having 60 tulip designs, and in the lower area has 2 Unfortunately, when we visited the mosque, it was being renovated, so its grandeur and beautiful design was slightly diminished. However, whilst in the mosque, we noted an interesting factor about the layout of the prayer which contradicted some of Sami's claims back in Woking. Men and women prayed separately, which was expected, but in this mosque, there was a section reserved at the back for women which was much dwarfed by the men's open space for praying. These implications reflect the universal inequality between men and women, which manifests itself differently from culture to culture. Another one of Istanbul's impressive buildings from the Ottoman Empire is the Tophahi Palace. In the 15th century, it served as the main residence and administrative headquarters of the Ottoman sultans. The palace complex consists of 4 main courtyards and many smaller buildings. Female members of the sultan's family lived in the harem, and leading state officials held meetings in the Imperial Council building. The imperial harem was home to the sultan's mother, the concubines and wives of the sultan and the rest of his family, including his children and their servants. The harem contained more than 400 rooms. For the sultan's daughters and wives, there was no trespassing beyond the gates of the harem. Only the sultan himself, the queen mother, the sultan's consorts and favourites, the princes and the concubines were allowed out of the harem. Many of the rooms within the harem were designed by Mimar Sinan, Istanbul's most renowned architect, but some of the rooms reflect the Italian-inspired Ottoman Baroque style which was fashionable in the 18th and 19th century. These decorations contrast with the old Ottoman classical age. Our guide Chitin was much more knowledgeable and interested in this early Islamic art and explained to us some of the symbolism displayed on the thousands of hand-painted tiles.
How many circles were? 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 in total. So when you reach the 7 around the rose, all the Muslims, once they go, that's an obligation, once they go for their pilgrimage to Mecca, to Kaaba, they have to turn 7 times.
What's the symbol of 7?
Symbol, I mean 7 is always a sacred number since Judaism, so you should just check it. You see? Tulip, carnations. This is a symbolic rose, which is Prophet Muhammad. So it goes on. So you have God, in a way, life after death, and Muhammad.
Finally, we made our way onto the terrace at the end of the palace complex, which gave us an impressive panoramic view of Istanbul and the Bosphorus.
So, first of all, now you're in a school. The name of this place called Cafer Aga Medresesi, and Cafer Aga Medresesi was built in 1559 by Sinan. You know, Sinan was a famous architect in the Ottoman Empire. We have beautiful garden.
Yeah.
And around the garden there are 15 small rooms. That's the main classroom. It used to be a university. It used to be a dormitory.
Okay, so it's served a lot of food.
You know, but last 40 years this place run by the Turkish Cultural Service Foundation, which belongs to Ministry of Tourism. We have 24 different courses and more than 400 people are learning. But they come different day, different time. Means as a local artist, as a foundation, we're trying to keep traditional things stay alive. This is the idea. I'm going to do marbling. Actually in Turkish we called Ebru, E-B-R-U. In English we called marbling. It's a very old technique. When you go to Turkish Islamic Art Museum or Topkapı Palace, you can see very old piece from 11th, 12th century, but it became really popular during the Ottoman Empire, like 16th, 15th century. And in the past, they were using this paper as a wallpaper for bookbinding. Bookbinding, also background of the calligraphy. Nowadays, you can draw any sort of flowers, and you can use your own imagination. It can be abstract as well. And here, the materials are, they are natural, as it was. For example, in the tree, there is water and resin. Resin is from the tree. We're adding with the water, and it became intensive. And pens are natural pigment dyes. We add the water and put a little bit of gallbladder. See, the resin keeps the paints on the surface and gallbladder expanding. Okay?
The most highly esteemed art form in Islamic culture is calligraphy, primarily because of its significant role in transcribing the word of Allah as written in the Quran. Istanbul was renowned for producing the finest calligraphers, and calligraphy is at the very heart of Islamic identity. In mosques, snippets of the Quran guide the thoughts of the faithful. The pen is the potent symbol of knowledge, but many worshippers were illiterate, and the clarity of the words and messages can be obscured in the rhymes and patterns of the text, so they have another way of looking at it. The Suleymaniye Mosque is part of an enormous complex for Suleiman the Magnificent. Suleiman the Lawgiver, as he is known, ruled for most of the first part of the 16th century. In terms of European rulers, this was a time when François Ier was ruling, the time of Charles V, the time of enormously powerful rulers, and Suleiman was most definitely one of them. This building, which was built 36 years into his reign, is a testament to his greatness and that of the Ottoman Empire.
Prophet Muhammad says, God, Allah, is beautiful and He likes the beauty.
Yeah.
So that means the art is important, right? So we should try our best to make things more beautiful. Mm-hmm. The most famous architect we have is Sinan, architect Sinan.
Yeah.
He was a very interesting man.
Yeah.
He mixed the art with the science and many things. For example, he built Suleymaniye Mosque. Some people say it is the most fine building on earth. And it is a perfect building in many aspects. Imagine architect Sinan used the best architectural calculations there, used the golden ratio calculations there, used the arts, the science. Imagine an architect is not responsible of cleaning the place, right? he used some natural solutions to clean the air inside the mosque. And when you go inside, you just breathe and you will find a very fresh air inside.
The reason the interior always feels cool is partly because a clever airflow system was incorporated into the original design to direct soot from the candles and oil lamps to a single point. It was then collected and used as ink.
He was interested in the beauty and the cleaning of the place. Or it was not his responsibility, right? Maybe some servants would clean it.
Yeah.
But he thought it's not kind to kill innocent spiders for cleaning purpose. What to do for this? After many nights of thinking, he had a solution. He brought few eggs from India, ostrich eggs, and took inside and applied some liquids, maybe some chemicals, we don't know what's the formula, and put inside the mosque. And for several centuries, no spider, no scorpion, no many insects entered the mosque, and they are not killed. Imagine such a beautiful solution. So this is the art.
Yeah.
And the art and the science and the faith are, it's very mixed in Islam.
The Suleymaniye Mosque is viewed as Sinan's crowning achievement where Ottoman architecture reaches its peak. The Ottoman Empire itself was of enormous scale that ruled far to the east, south to Egypt, across North Africa and into the Balkans and Europe. The materials used in the mosque were gathered from all over the empire, therefore it functions as a trophy of imperial grandeur. The columns were taken from Egypt and the Baalbek and travelled across the empire just like the materials used by Justinian in the building of the Hagia Sophia. Hence, it can be seen as an attempt to take that ancient building, remake it and better it to prove the superiority of Suleiman. This idea shows that the beautiful and impressive architecture in Istanbul was commissioned by the Ottoman sultans and therefore derives from their imperial power. An interesting link can thus be applied to the beauty of the art and to a thirst for power rather than an emphasis on faith. Istanbul with an acute sense of how art and architecture is often used simultaneously for religious purposes as well as to assert power. However, the power can be seen as a means to the end, which is ultimately to reflect and somehow encompass the divine. The classification and discussion of Islamic art as a bisected entity divided into the secular and the sacred is actually a classically Western view which has been imposed on the art of Islam. We decided to return to the V&A to find out more about how the Islamic heritage is influencing art today. Claiming modernity as a Western phenomenon, art histories have defined Islamic art in the 20th century as traditional, folklorist, religious, and even as an art that no longer exists. Islamic art was set back in time. Any continuity was seen as an adherence to tradition, and no space was given for other modified versions of modernity. Back at the V&A, we came to realise that this view was very much skewed.
It's Jamil Prize 5, so it's the 5th round of the Jamil Prize, which is a prize for contemporary art from the Middle East. There were joint winners, the architect, the mosque in Bangladesh, which is amazing, we'll go and have a look, and in the far back right-hand corner, something which is kind of riffing on geometry and calligraphy. That's interesting, this is an interesting example of what can you call contemporary Islamic art, and because it is a mosque, obviously it's inherently Islamic, and she is picking up on things in Islamic traditions which she sees as significant, and so she sees light as one of those things as significant.
Yunis Hamoun's work reflects his religious beliefs. He uses pattern, geometry and numbers to convey ideas drawn from Islamic traditions. He prefers odd numbers as they cannot be divided into neat sets and as such suggest infinity. For hat lights, the artist used 77 knitted hats called takia, which are worn by Moroccan men and usually signal them as observant Muslims. The electric wires that all link the hats represents the idea of one faith shared by all believers, and the hats are arranged in 10 groups representing the major groupings within Islam, which are connected by their common faith. Mehdi Moutasha left Iraq in the 1960s and settled in Paris. There, he encountered geometric abstraction and minimalism and absorbs elements of both. The basis of his work is a line which he develops into constructions using a systematic approach. His method is compatible with the creative traditions of his homeland, and his works draws from particularly on Islamic traditions of sophisticated geometry and calligraphy. Central to Moutasha's method is his belief in geometry and mathematical order as guiding principles. They are of universal relevance. Both traditional revivalism and global assimilation continue to characterise modern art and architecture as a whole, yet the ambiguity presented by Islamic art of being apparently both modern and backwards stands as a challenge to the age of modernism.
زعيم